Washington. The Senate is heading toward a showdown vote on Friday on legislation to keep the government open past midnight, and Democrats appear ready to block it, gambling that a weakened President Trump will have to offer concessions in the face of a looming government crisis. After the House cleared stopgap spending legislation on Thursday that would keep the government funded through February 16, Senate Republicans are set to test whether Democrats will make good on their promise to move the government toward a shutdown. But Democrats appear intent on securing concessions that would, among other things, protect from deportation young immigrants brought to the country illegally as children, increase domestic spending, aid Puerto Rico, and bolster the government's response to the opioid epidemic. And they hope that Mr. Trump, scorched by the firestorm prompted by his vulgar, racially tinged comments on Africa last week, will be forced back to the negotiating table. Republicans control the House, they control the Senate, and they control the presidency, said Senator Patrick J. Leahy, Democrat of Vermont. The government stays open if they want it to stay open, and it shuts down if they want it to shut down. It's time to stop kicking the can down the road and time to start negotiating in good faith. In an early morning Twitter post on Friday, Mr. Trump put pressure on Democrats to keep the federal government open. If Democrats vote the bill down, the move would hold undeniable risks. 10 Senate Democrats are running for re-election in states that Mr. Trump won in 2016, and many of those states such as Indiana, Missouri, North Dakota, and West Virginia may hold little sympathy for one of the primary causes of the looming shutdown, protecting young undocumented immigrants known as Dreamers. Senator Mitch McConnell of Kentucky, the majority leader, lamented the Democrats' fixation on illegal immigration at the expense of addressing other matters. Instead, Republicans emphasized what Democrats were voting against: continued funding for the military and renewed funding for children's health care if Senate Democrats obstruct this legislation and as a result shut down the government. They have made the decision to cut off pay to our troops and block children's health care funding they support, said Representative Kevin McCarthy of California, the majority leader. The bill, which passed the House hours earlier, 230 to 197, would keep the government open for a month, provide funding for the Children's Health Insurance Program for 6 years, and delay or suspend a handful of taxes imposed by the Affordable Care Act. At least about a dozen Senate Democratic votes will probably be needed to approve the measure because some Republican senators are expected to vote no, and Senator John McCain, Republican of Arizona, is absent. The standoff on immigration dates back to September, when Mr. Trump moved to end an Obama-era program called Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA, which shields the young immigrants from deportation. Democrats have been eager to enshrine into law protections for those immigrants. At the same time, congressional leaders from both parties have been trying to reach an agreement to raise strict limits on domestic and military spending, a deal that would pave the way for a long-term spending package. So far this fiscal year, they have relied on stopgap measures to keep the government funded. But negotiations have been fitful and grew only more charged last week after Mr. Trump referred to African nations as shithole countries. By Thursday, talks on those matters had produced little visible progress, and prominent House Democrats were introducing a resolution to censure the president for his words. By the end of Thursday, it was still far from clear how the political blame would be divvied up if the government does shut down on Saturday, the anniversary of Mr. Trump's inauguration. But Democrats seemed eager to force the issue at some point. Congress needs to do better than government by crisis, short-term fixes, and sidestepping difficult issues. That time is now, said Senator Chris Coons, Democrat of Delaware. I still believe we can keep the government open, solve the issues we've failed to address for several months and govern this country the way the American people expect us to, but the short-term bill that House Republicans passed tonight simply doesn't meet the test of basic governance.